Welcome back to The Other Side. We're talking to Rob McMullan from the Natural Law Institute, a regular guest on The Other Side, about Western civilization. Rob, why does the left hate the West so much and want to tear down so many of these things that we've been talking about in Western civilization? What's the gain for them in that?
So one of the other values that we talk about in the West is the idea of sovereignty, and that you should have status for being a sovereign person. I mean, not in the way that you get these sort of freedom people saying, I don't need to abide by the road rules because I'm a sovereign citizen. That's silliness.
Yeah.
But the idea of sovereignty is that, we talked about having to find agreement between different tribes,
Yep.
different sovereign entities. A sovereign really is somebody who is responsible for themselves and their domain and is not dependent on other people. So a definition of that...
Not the extreme libertarian. It's
No.
I shouldn't pick on the libertarians because they don't think this.
Yeah.
But there is a degree of personal responsibility that you are required to have to sustain your freedom.
Right. So the definition we developed of sovereignty: the demonstrated ability to act without permission, constraint, or dependency on others within the limits of natural, physical, and reciprocal law.
Okay.
So you're not dependent on other people and you're in charge of your domain. We can all be sovereign at different levels, but the whole point about the West is, once again, if we go back in our prehistory and trace our history, there have been a lot of institutional mechanisms to train people or reward people for becoming sovereign, for becoming responsible. So one of the ideas too in the West is that you should get status. You should be seen as one of the bigger people for being responsible.
And we used to have a lot of that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that, there are institutions and ways and social norms that shame people for being irresponsible. They used to be. And so that helped train people that they used to be.
I'm starting to see where the left-wing stuff eroding that all comes in now, right?
That's right. So let's take a look at this slide.
Is that... Yeah, okay.
Let's take a look.
This freaked me right out, man, when you showed me this originally.
So I saved this a while ago. It came out from the Smithsonian. Now
it looks like something that's come out of the Ku Klux Klan when you first look at it. I thought, what is this racist nonsense? And then I realized this is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian Institute
in the States.
It is absolutely amazing.
I think after seeing what a bad look it was, they actually took it down.
Oh, did they?
But I saved it a few years ago. But the point is...
aspects and assumptions of white culture in the United States. And they go into things...
which really means European civilization.
Right. Rugged individualism, family structure, emphasis on the scientific method. Now, they're not making a value statement on these, but you do kind of get a vibe that these are not necessarily all positive, right?
That's the first step in undermining, is to say, well, these things aren't a given. There are other ways of doing things and they're all morally equivalent.
Right.
And then the next...
The great, what does Jordan Peterson call it? I forget the postmodernist term for this of, moral equivalence.
Moral equivalence, yeah, but that's the first...
relativism. Everything's relative.
Everything's relative until they decide that actually you're bad. And then it becomes not relative anymore.
Yes,
so
very quickly.
This sort of stuff is the first step in undermining these things. But if we look at the second... Can we look at the second?
I love the way the first one is rugged individualism on that other one.
Well, that's right.
That's the masculine aspect, right, which I suppose would demonize that pretty well.
Let's
chuck up the second part of this, because it's one of these long info sheets. The bottom part of it.
So the things here are,
Protestant work ethic.
Wealth equals worth, respect authority, plan for the future, follow rigid time schedules. You can look at this as much as you like, your listeners and viewers can, but the point I want to make is all of these things which they are bringing attention to and insinuating that they're criticizing are all reducible to some form of responsibility.
Ah, right. So this is the erosion of that sense of personal responsibility.
Which is erosion of sovereignty. The whole point in Western civilization is that we're supposed to be sovereign individuals and sovereign people. You're supposed to have rights. You're supposed to be sovereign individuals under the rule of law. We've done a show about reciprocity. Reciprocity is how sovereigns interact, whether that's sovereigns over a tribe or a nation or even sovereign
reciprocity
people.
Being I do something for you in return, and that builds trust, and then we keep dealing and
Yeah, win-win. We did a show about that a couple of years ago, which I'll post as well.
Remember.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got things on here like we'll go back to that second slide for a second, John. So the Protestant work ethic, religion, status, power, and authority, future orientation, planning for the future, delayed gratification. Tomorrow we will be better. Progress is always best. Now, again, this is in the context of African American Cultural Museum in the United States, sort of saying that these are aspects of white culture that maybe are not so positive, and that we shouldn't. That they're not truths or positive things. They're just the way that white people think.
That's right. But here's the problem: is where natural law comes into it. These things are based on natural laws of the universe: entropy, scarcity, the need for adversarial markets, blah blah blah.
Which have evolved again over
that's
thousands
right.
of years in our civilization that you can't just wipe away and go, this is...
That's right. So they do this sort of thing because our institutions used to elevate in responsibility. The left now is a war against responsibility. They're trying to elevate irresponsibility. They're trying to give people status and raise people who don't demonstrate responsibility. Whereas the West typically used to raise people who did demonstrate responsibility according to the natural laws of the universe. And so if you look...
If we don't get back to that, then we're going to fall to bits.
The whole problem with natural law is you can ignore it if you want, but it's going to reassert itself, because these sort of things are indicative of them saying these are subjective relative values that you're imposing upon us.
Yeah.
But we do, I do natural law because you discover the natural world, natural
actual reality,
objective reality basis of these behaviors and values and things. And you say, well, we're not actually imposing them. We're just adapted to them.
Yeah.
And so if you want to look at the West, I'm a fan of that saying. So if you want to command nature's laws, you must first obey them.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what the West has done, is we've gone, well, through process of discoveries and these certain behaviors, we've discovered a lot about the natural laws of the universe, and we've adapted to them to thrive within them. The left is saying, no, these are not objective. They're just things you're imposing upon us. You're oppressing us.
This came out a lot in the Black Lives Matter movement also, and we saw it in the Indigenous cultural movement, right? The First Nations concept movement as well, sort of saying that these Western values have been imposed upon Indigenous people, and therefore, they're not. We need to push back on them.
Right.
And this stuff, it sounds nutty, right? We're sitting here talking about it saying, well, obviously, anybody with half a brain is going to look at that and say, this makes sense. But they don't.
It's a very popular way of arguing.
Especially in the under 40 age group, right?
Yep.
The universities, this whole reversal of people thinking they're so clever and insightful and cynical and witty. They think I can see through the culture, right?
Yeah.
Like, that sort of mindset of I'm the clever
There's
academic.
another way to be, man.
Yeah, well, there is, but, there
is, but you'll pay
the way that
cost
we
of it.
are didn't come from nowhere.
Exactly.
The way that we are isn't some, religion being imposed or it's a guide. It's a guide to reality and to truth about, how we evolved through our... And we see that in our cultural institutions, and we can't just tear those cultural institutions down and think that they don't have any value.
Exactly. So, at the end of the day, going through this presentation, all I would think of is, how far gone we are already. If you look at our institutions and our popular and our authoritative conversations, these things are almost non-existent, and it's a real shame. And, we're feeling the effects of that now. But at the end of the day, we adapted to natural laws. We adapted our behaviors and institutions to elevate people that could demonstrate responsibility. The left is a war against that.
A war against us. Now, see, this is the thing. Now, I want to talk about Australian culture here for a sec, because we're particularly susceptible to this more than I think other cultures. We're younger. We don't have that vast European history. Other Western cultures. We don't have America's sort of, daily reminder at school every day, the Pledge of Allegiance, or awareness of the Constitution, the political system, and where it came from. They have a much better sort of understanding of that in most of America. But Aussies tend to want to. We have this lovely rebellious streak, which is great most of the time. We have a tall poppy syndrome. We like to tear down we have this idea of not having airs and graces but we have a disrespect for institutions and tradition that's healthy to a point and unhealthy to a point. And I think we've tipped into the really unhealthy, where we're sort of looking at our institutions and losing our confidence and trust in them. We don't respect. We have a younger generation. My generation X was pretty rebellious. Even the boomers, of course, they were the original rebels, right? Now they're the demons, of course, but that's according to the young. But
Only if you need to buy a house.
But you go back to the war generation and previous generations before the boomers, there was a lot more respect for your elders, respect for institutions, respect for parliament, for the church, for the government, for the state, and for business leaders. Most importantly, respect for the market, respect for Western civilization, the culture that we came from. We've got to get back to some of that, right?
We do. I mean, the culmination of everything I've talked about, the history of natural law in the West, was with the American Constitution. The founders talked a lot about natural law, and that's usually considered to be the culmination of all these things. The work that the Natural Law Institute is doing is actually a little bit on the patching a few holes at the end of that to even upgrade it even further. But the point is, look at the success of the United States, and the left will say, well, it's because they're oppressive and they, steal everything. But the point of the Natural Law Institute is to go back to the proof in reality of why these things develop, the actual civilizational engineering that evolved to get certain nations where they are. And at the end of the day, to wrap up the problem with the left, I will put this as a very radical theory out to your listeners, that we don't so much have left and right, we actually have European civilization and the war against that.
Right.
The left is really in so many of these ways. There's a good left where you look after people, like we talked about the church community thing, look after, bit of redistribution.
Traditional Labour Party values.
Yeah, there's all that stuff. But if you're talking about the Marxist left and the real radicals,
the Greens,
it's a war. The Greens, it's just a war against responsibility. It's a war against God. It's a war against the laws of nature's God.
Yeah,
that's what it comes
that's
down
the thing.
to.
I mean, you don't even have to be religious, right? It would be just you're not adhering to nature. You're not adhering to reality, and that's what I like about you guys. You're not looking at this stuff from a religious point of view. You're not looking at it from a cultural superiority point of view. You're just saying what are the fundamentals and how did we get here, and what do we need to protect and preserve as we improve.
Yep.
Right. Whereas the left are just saying, it all sucks, tear it all down, and then we'll rebuild again this wonderful communist thing run by the king.
Based on arbitrary rule.
And we've seen the kings. We know
based on feelings and based on subjective decrees, But if you do that, you're not going to have nice things. And we're starting to not have nice things now. And we're telling you why.
There you go. Natural Law Institute. And if people want to check you out, mate, your Twitter handle.
Yeah, I'm the Australian representative. So if you want to know something or get more in touch with the theory of things or go a bit deeper into it, follow me on Twitter, ask me some questions. There's plenty out there. We also did a show on reciprocity, which is the gold standard of cooperation.
I'll put that out again this week somewhere, make it a bit more prominent on the website, but it can be found in our episodes. I can't remember which number it is, but we'll find it.
It all comes under the natural law of cooperation.
Great to talk to you again, Rob. It's always good to have you on the show.
Thanks.
That's the McMullan.
The McMullan.
The McMullan.
On X.
McMullan on
That's
X.
it.
All right, mate. We'll catch you again next time. Rob McMullan there. I want to tell you about a fantastic initiative that's happening out of Canberra right now. It's called the Awards for Men in Leadership. The awards are given out on International Men's Day, which is November 19. They're designed to combat the increasing denigration of masculinity in our culture and the widespread discrimination against males inside and outside the workplace. The goal is to lift the well-being of boys and men and facilitate healthy collaboration between men and women. The awards for men in leadership are designed to inspire men to make a bigger contribution to family and community and to elevate positive male role models. There's a $10,000 scholarship for studies and professional development, public recognition for the winners, and a year of mentorship and executive coaching for each recipient. It's targeted at young men and middle-aged guys who fought their way up from some other kind of disadvantage. This is the third year of the awards and it'll be the biggest yet. To find out more, just search up the Awards for Men in Leadership on Facebook. That was a segment clip from our weekly Friday night news show, The Other Side, which you can watch in full by simply going to YouTube and searching up The Other Side Australia. Then you'll find our full shows playlist. You can also find all of our full shows and our segments on our own website, othersidetv.com.au. That's othersidetv.com.au. Help us build a whole new Aussie media by joining us over there and signing up for the exclusive side.